So a lot of people, myself included, when they give advice about writing, tend to go really broad and say stuff like, find your voice and write all the time and practice for 10 years and maybe you'll get good. And that's all great advice, and it's the best advice, and it's the advice you need to follow. But for once, I'm going to give some more specific advice, like literal things I would like you to do as a writer. And I'm always hesitant to do stuff like this because I don't want to overly influence anyone's writing. I don't want to tell them, like, do everything this way because that's my way and you should do it like me. I feel like that's a lot of what school is like. It's a lot of teachers telling you to do things a certain way, and then they really drill it into your head, but then once you actually start writing, you realize that none of that shit's necessary. And that's true of this as well. Nothing I'm telling you right now is something you should take as a rule. In fact, a lot of this is stuff, a lot of these are rules I break myself. But I think these are good starting tips for how to make your writing more engaging. And it's just stuff that, when I learned this, taking it into account helped me improve a lot. And, I feel like I'm able to break these rules because I spent so long trying to follow them and then figured out how I could break them in interesting and unique ways. So the biggest rule I have is try to get to the point as fast as possible, or at least try to intrigue me as fast as possible. You'll probably notice that my videos start off very fast. I usually make it clear what the video is going to be about as fast as possible, even in most of these vlogs. Oftentimes the opening sentence kind of makes the whole point. It's after that I'm just explaining why I said that thing. I start off with, here's what I have a problem with, or here's what I want to make a point about, and then from then on it's proving my point so that I'm not just making a statement. I'm explaining myself. But what I absolutely can't stand is when someone starts off their writing with like an introduction of who they are or what the subject is or why they're talking about the thing they're talking about, as opposed to just talking about the thing they're talking about. And I don't mean to sound mean-spirited about this, because this isn't any kind of professional writing, but it really cracks me up because I get fan letters all the time, and like 50, no, more than 50, like 70% of all the letters I get start off like this. Hey Digi, I know you get a lot of these, or I know you're really busy, so I'm going to get to the point as fast as possible. Now, the irony of that sentence is that you've already spent a whole sentence before getting to the point. If you really want to get to the point as fast as possible, start off with the point. Now, obviously, these are fan letters. They're not professional writing. I just think it's a really hilarious thing because of the fact that I start off my videos intentionally removing those kind of sentences. And that's basically how I developed my style, was that in about 2010, I took an English 1 class in college, like the most basic English class, and our teacher had assigned us to write an essay between like 700 and 1,000 words or something like that, and I would always write way above the word counts I was supposed to for those things, because I didn't think that was a problem. In high school, writing too many words was usually praised, they didn't really want you to not go past the word count. So I gave this essay to the teacher, and he was like, this is too long. You need to tighten this up. And he was like, I think you're going to be a great writer one day. Because I already had like a very established voice. I was already doing the whole like gonzo thing. But he was like, you just need to shorten this like considerably. Because it's too redundant. And like, I took some paragraphs out and gave it back. And he was like, it's still too long. And then I started like really obsessively looking over it. And I was just like, how can I remove every single unnecessary word from this? And so I shortened it down way farther. Like, once I looked at every like sentence and thought, how can I convey the same meaning that's in this sentence in as few words as possible? And then for a while I was just really obsessively writing that way. Every post I wrote was like 500 words maximum, and all of them were like cut down to be as concise as humanly possible, to the point that it felt robotic. Like the writing had no personality at all, because I was just trying to make it as tight as possible. And then once I sort of mastered that, Then I started working more detail back into it, making it less of that robotic style, injecting more of my personality into it. And then once I started writing for video, if you were to watch all my anime videos, you'd see this slow evolution of me using less and less like complicated terms and complicated terminology, because I wrote in a way where I wanted individual sentences to have impact. And it's hard to do that when you're speaking, because people aren't reading over, like, you don't have the opportunity to read the sentence 3 times to, like, make sure you understand it, or to, like, really let each word soak in, especially with the way I edit videos, which is very rapid fire. So there was lots of stuff in my videos that was just going over people's heads, and I knew it was, because, like, I would hear it myself and be like, this is too fast. Like, there's no way people are processing all of this information. So I started writing in stuff that was less complicated, or I would just straight up write in filler words, like the word like, or words like very. When I was trying to tighten up my language, one of the strictest rules I had was never use the word very, because it adds nothing. If you write the sentence, this show is long, versus this show is very long, it doesn't really change the meaning at all, because very has to be in comparison to something else. Like, either way, you get the point. The show is long, you know, but very also has more human quality to it. So if I say this, this show is, pretty good, or very good, or pretty normal, or very exceptional, those things sort of make it easier to understand the words as they come. It makes it flow better. So after years of obsessively removing those words from every script, I then started injecting them back in deliberately. And so now when I edit my scripts, I usually add in more words than I take out. But you got to get to that point first. And I think the best way to get there is to study everything you write and remove all the unnecessary shit. Here's some immediate pointers. Remove your introduction, and especially remove your first impressions if it's not a first impressions video. Because there's so many videos that start off with, when I first started this show, I expected it to be shit. But then as I watched it, I was surprised that it turned out to be great. That does not matter. Like, the fact, like, whatever you thought about it at the beginning is irrelevant, because you don't think that anymore. Now you think this. And if the rest of the video is about why you think the show is good, we never had to hear about the fact that you didn't always think it was good. If you started off just, this show's good, and then you made the point about why it's good, we would never question it. Like, the fact that you didn't think it was good the whole time is completely irrelevant. Now, I understand why these things happen, because when you first start writing a page, when you first start writing an essay, then you want to break the ice somehow. It's very easy to start off with, like, impressions, like first impressions, or just your overall thoughts on something, or just anything that makes it easy to get the ball rolling, and then you can start making the point. So here's what I would do. Write that whole thing, write that whole opening part, and then after you've finished writing your post, figure out where you can cut off the whole beginning. I would do this sometimes where I would look at a post and realize that the first 3 paragraphs were useless, and like I'd find the exact sentence that has the most impact and starts making the point, and then just cut off everything before there. I've done this a lot of times with even my videos now, where I'll cut off like one paragraph in the middle where I'm like transitioning between points, and I'm like, this paragraph doesn't actually add anything. Boop, and it's gone. So just try to cut out all of the extraneous data. Cut out anything that's not necessary. Tighten it up as tightly as you can, and then think about making it flow better. Think about making it into a, something that feels a little bit more human, or has a little bit more of your style in there. But just think about like what you're saying, like what does it mean to the audience? So that brings me to my next tip. Never assume that the audience understands things the same way that you do. Here are some criticisms that piss me off every time I hear them. One is bad pacing. And the reason bad pacing bothers me is that everyone has different ideas of what that means. It's like, it's a phrase that, like, you kind of get it, you get that a show can have good or bad pacing, but it's something that most people have like an individual sense of, Some people like stuff to be fast-paced, some people like stuff to be slow-paced, some people like stuff that's just weird and out there. And like, there's some shows that that can be jarring or weird in their pacing, but still overall click somehow. And when you just say bad pacing without explaining how the pacing is bad, then the audience won't get it. Like, you know, they know that you think the pacing is bad, but it doesn't communicate to them how the pacing is bad. So they don't know if they'll agree. You know, like, I've had so many times where people will criticize something like, it has bad characterization, or the characters aren't that fleshed out, or this or that. And, like, I think that stuff can be fine in passing. And, you know, I'm a little ashamed to say that I use that stuff, but mostly in stuff that is, like, where it's not relevant to the video. Like in the Turn Your Brain Off video. Like, I say something like, High School Fleet is very tightly written and paced. I don't really explain how that is the case, but that's not really relevant to the video, because like, the point I'm trying to make is that you can make a good show that doesn't require a lot of thought. You know, like, it's not a review of High School Fleet. If it was, then I would go into detail about those things because that would be relevant to the video itself. But in that video, if I went off and did a whole analysis of High School Fleet, it would really bloat the video. You know, and a lot of people find my videos to be bloated and redundant anyways, but I cut them down to as much as I think is necessary personally to communicate as much of the idea as I can. Because I don't want it to be, like, just me saying this show's good and this show's bad, and then people will be like, I don't think that, you know, and then it's not relatable to anybody, which is how you end up with That Anime Snob video. So, like, that would be my advice. Just assume that the audience does not generally feel the same way that you do. Assume that you have to convince them, and then try to convince them, you know. If you're making a point like turning your brain off is not necessary, then people don't really have to agree with you on the shows you choose, which is why I chose so few and such, like, weird ones, like High School Fleet. Like, I didn't expect anyone to watch the video and be like, yeah, High School Fleet, great example of why you don't always have to think that hard about a show. Like, everyone can substitute their own show that they had that experience with. Everyone can think of, like, oh, here's a show that I feel that way about, that I thought had great pacing and great writing, but also, you know, but wasn't that deep, and I was able to enjoy it. And I can also think of a show that broke my suspension of disbelief by doing all this dumb shit. Like, it doesn't matter that it's Heavy Object and High School Fleet. Those are just the two shows that I was thinking about at the time. But if you're gonna talk about one of those shows, you have to pretend like your audience has none of the same critical awareness as you, and then you have to explain why you feel that way. And like for instance, my Myriad Colors Phantom World video, like, trying to explain why I don't think the show looks good, that was the thing I had to work the hardest on, because most of the stuff I was saying was stuff that I figured everyone would agree with. You know, like, trying to explain the basic problems with it wasn't that hard. But when it came to the visual aesthetic, it's like, this is not obvious. No one else is looking at this show and immediately thinking, that looks like shit. Or if they are, then they might be even confused. Like, I was a little confused when I first watched it. Like, this obviously is well animated and has, you know, it is well put together. Why do I feel like it doesn't look that good? And so I had to really study it and analyze it and, like, explain in detail. And that's why that section takes up, like, a huge part of the video, because it's like, this is the number one thing I don't expect anyone to relate to unless I break it down. But if it's something you think people can easily relate to, then you don't have to do that. You know, if it's something that you think is going to be obvious to a huge amount of people, then just go for it. And a big way to know that is to just read lots of critical reception. Read what other people think about shows. You know, read forum posts, read reviews, read comments on reviews, and, like, try to get a sense for what people generally get or don't get. You know, look for what people tend to disagree about. If someone says, like, this show has bad pacing, and then, like, all the comments don't seem to agree or don't seem to get it, then focus on that as something you need to explain more. Whereas if there's something that everyone seems to get, don't bother. I think those are all pretty good general tips that will, like, immediately improve your writing if you try to do any of that. Because by far my biggest problem with everyone else's writing on planet Earth is too much introductions and too many assumptions. Too much of saying, this is what I'm about to say, or I know this is a waste of time, but, or without further ado. Like, without further ado is literal ado. I know Devu has a huge problem with this. That, like, the amount of, like, you could cut out those 3 words and you would already be making your point as opposed to holding your point back for 3 more words. It's just filler. It doesn't add anything, and it's obnoxious. And as soon as you get attuned to it, you can't stand it anymore. So, cut all that stuff out, and anything that is not exactly clear, that is like the way you view shows, try to figure out how you view shows that might be different from other people. You know, if you want to say the sentence, this character was not well handled, then you really have to explain that, because I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know what a well-handled character is. But if you're saying this show has really pretty colors, and it's a show that, like, clearly has pretty colors, no one's probably going to disagree with you that hard. Unless it's, like, a show that you don't think anyone would agree with you with. Then you have to really explain yourself. So yeah, those are my broad general tips. Follow those. Do that stuff. Maybe I'll make another one of these sometime if I come up with more.